Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining this Prompt Layer and Arise webinar focused on prompt engineering. I'm very, very excited we have a very special guest here on this webinar, so excited to introduce him. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Aparna, one of the founders here at Arise. And today we're lucky to have Jared, who's the founder of Prompt Layer. Jared, do you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Aparna. Yeah, like was said, my name is Jared. I'm one of the founders of Prompt Layer. We are a small team based out of New York, and we are the platform for prompt engineering. I think we're a pretty early company, but we kind of our goal is to help people do prompt engineering, to build workflows around prompt engineering. And you can find us at promptlayer.com. And excited for this talk. I think there's been a lot of discussion around everything LLMs, and not enough focus on the actual important part, which is how do you do these prompts well? So excited to get into it.
Awesome. Let's jump in then. Awesome. Maggie, do you want to click over to the next slide?
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I guess to start off a little bit here, I guess we'll dive in a little bit into like the technical details of the prompt and what is the prompt. And I guess just like start off a little bit of motivation around like prompt engineering as well. And we're gonna get into this, and I'll let Aparna jump in if she has any other thoughts on this as well. But just like we really believe that there's a lot to do with LLMs. And when you're building LLMs, there's a lot of things that matter. You got to choose which model to use. You got to choose which parameters for the model. But we're in this new world, as opposed to in ML ops, in LLM ops, there's this new primitive, this new fundamental building block, which is the prompt. And it's this string, as you see here. It's just like the string text. So like the motivation behind why we decided to do this talk was that this is kind of the most important part of prompt of LLM development, is this prompt engineering. And yeah, I don't know if Aparna wanted to add anything to kind of like why prompt engineering is so important. It's kind of like it feels a little buzzwordy at first, but that's what we've seen like from our platforms and like our customers. I don't know if you have anything you want to add before we jump into the
Yeah.
technical details.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe what we could do is maybe set up a little bit of context. So I think one of the most important things is in this new space is that you might be using the same foundational model that a lot of your maybe even your customers or your competitors are using. We have teams that are using OpenAI and their competitors are also using OpenAI. And the most control that you actually have over the outputs of this will be the prompt. So it's, in my opinion, it's the most critical part of how you actually have, any input into what the output of these models will be. And what we see teams doing is actually connecting their proprietary data. They're testing out multiple prompt templates at the same time. And Jared, would you say that there's, there's kind of a lot of talk around prompt engineering, maybe earlier in this year, but has there been any standardization around prompt engineering?
If only, I think. I think maybe one day we'll have standardization. I think there's been different buckets people have fallen into with regard to prompt engineering and how it's done and how they save prompts and how they edit prompts and how much they even care about the prompt. But there's no standard playbook here. And I mean, that's what hopefully you can come out of this talk with, a little bit more of a standard playbook. But at the end of the day, there's not going to be, everybody does something different. And I think and we're going to talk about this more, but that's kind of the key, at least in my opinion, the key to prompt engineering is knowing that you're prompt engineering for your specific use case and maybe picking and choosing different techniques people use and the ones we'll talk about and doing the best thing for your use case. Yeah. And yeah, unless there's anything more Aparna wanted to add, let's jump right into kind of the technical details. Like, how do you store this prompt template? So this we see right here is kind of like the F string way. This is the simplest way. This is, if you're just making a string in your code base and you just want to call it, hey, Jason, looks like Jason's coming in here too. But yeah, let's keep going here. So like the F string this is the simplest way. This is kind of like when you make a string in Python and you just do a dot format. So as you can see here, you're an AI assistant that helps write papers. Today's date is, then we have a date variable, and then please summarize the book name. So these are the two variables, and it's literally just a plop and replace. So this is like the first version of templating. This, honestly, like most people do it this way. We'll show you a few more advanced ways, but this is like step one. This is like enter the realm of prompt engineering. So let's go on to the next slide and talk about like
do you think
how do you up this?
And Jared, how's it going, everyone? So me and a partner are kind of tag teaming this, both founders of Arise. Do you think in the previous example of the simple template, are most people just using string replace? Like is it like a Python string replace function that is it that simple, or are people actually having libraries in this, like in this, or is it just something really simple in the beginning?
Yeah, it's that simple. I think there are a few libraries that have come up. So like, for example, LangChain has a prompt template object or a prompt template class. But under the scene, like behind the scenes, under the hood, it's literally just doing a Python dot format, or it's literally just doing like a JavaScript backtick. And you really don't use a library for this. Like, you can use a library to store this and keep track of what the variables are, and that's something like we do a prompt layer, and you could keep track on your own as well. But at the end of the day, like for the actual swapping, don't overcomplicate it. Keep it simple.
Yeah. And then I think the next one, the next stage here is something more advanced.
Yeah. So Jinja Jinja you've probably heard of if you've ever done any web development. This was kind of I remember before everyone started using React, Jinja was kind of like the way to make websites, and it survived as a really pretty like robust templating language, string templating language, and this is what we're doing. This is like kind of this common theme that a prompt is just a string, and anything you're doing with it, you're just doing string manipulation, and that's kind of the building block. That I've heard my favorite comparison is people compare kind of like the ones and zeros of CPUs that have like grown into what we're doing today. We're at the ones and zeros stage with prompts, and this is like one level up. Maybe the Jinja is the machine code, but not to go too far in this analogy. But in this example, you can see your AI new summarizer, similar thing. But here we have a for loop. So you can put business logic in Jinja itself, which is the really cool part and makes it could be useful for RAG. Maybe you have a few few shot examples, and you kind of want to show different examples for different users, or maybe you want to be pulling in maybe you have 1,000 examples, and every time you run the prompt, you want to pull in 3 at random. So this is a good way to do it. Jinja keeps it very simple. It's, like I said, you don't need a library. Well, Jinja, you need a little bit of a library, but you still, like, it's still very low level. It makes a lot of sense. You don't need to overcomplicate it. There's enough complications with LLMs already. So yeah, so Jinja is a cool method. We've seen a few people start to use it already.
Yeah, it reminds me of like the HTML templates of the day a little bit. Like, and so it's really about composability, things that you might want to reuse somewhere, and or iterate through in some way, like a slightly more complex than the just simple replace that you might do at the string level, and with the kind of the previous kind of where a lot of people start.
Cool. Yeah, 100%. I think usually when people start with F strings, they're kind of doing this for loop, as you see. They're doing that in their business logic, but it's kind of moving it to the prompt template, which is like, you can make a very strong argument from an organizational standpoint. But I think on the next slide, we'll have kind of like the next phase of this, which is kind of just like trying to make functional programming into prompting. So this is obviously like a really trivial example and doesn't really get into it that much, but this is basically how do you make prompts as code? I know I'm being very high level, and if I was a viewer, I'd be annoyed by that, but it's kind of because we're in the early days of this, but there's a lot of proponents of prompting should be code. Prompting, why is it a string? This is kind of an imprecise way to do it. At the end of the day, a string is kind of just adding a bunch of characters together. How do we make this functional? How do we add even more business logic to the construction of these things? I don't know if you have any opinions on this, Jason, on just this kind of future, this like what functional.
I'm interested. I'm watching from a distance, wondering how many people are gonna live in, Python strings, or live in strings for as long as they can, or do these abstractions bring value? And I think it's a big debate. We'll see kind of where it goes. Having the functional, you can actually do a lot. You can construct things in complex ways. But then it also requires some mental overhead of the abstractions, which you're trying to have team members come up and understand and use. So I think the jury's out in my opinion. I'm trying to watch what teams are doing. Any idea, like, are people using any libraries? Like, I saw Microsoft Guidance kind of come out a couple months ago, but wasn't sure how much really people are picking that up. I haven't seen that many people using it. I thought there would be more use of some of these libraries. What do you think? Are most people just in that first phase right now of the string replacement?
Yeah. I think we'll probably get into guidance more a bit later in the talk, but like that's a great way to say, like, put it. People are in the first phase, and the jury's still out whether the first phase is the final stage or not. Like, I could make a strong argument that you're never really going to need more than Jinja for prompting, but you can also make a pretty strong argument that you're definitely going to need more than Jinja. So I hesitate to even make a judgment on it. But on the next slide, we kind of just like talk about the future, and like these are the two different ways, right? Like, are you just putting strings together, or are you building, like, is this object oriented? Like, is there a concept of object orientation here and like polymorphism of prompts? Like, I don't even know what that would look like.
I feel like it's also going to be team ergonomics desire. What do people like? What's easier to think about in the beginning? You'll probably, I'm sure you'll see both. I think part of my view is the context window is going to be, it will continue to be incredibly important, and managing that context window is like the challenge of like the prompt engineering stuff that you're working on and thinking about. And I can't imagine it getting easier to manage the context window. They're just getting bigger. You're putting more data in. So like there's definitely an argument for the code side, but it's also like, we'll see. We'll see. It's so easy for teams to think about strings too.
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting like argument here with the code side in terms of context window. When you're saying, like, as a programmer, I'd rather just never think about context window. If I could build abstractions on top of that, or as a prompt engineer, let's say, if I could build abstractions to never think about context, like ChatGPT is a great example. ChatGPT, when you're writing a prompt into ChatGPT, you're never thinking about the context window because it's doing all this smart summarization in the background and stuff like that. And I see also there's a comment here about that I think is really a great point, that prompts don't hinder your prompts with random tooling and complicate them. They're just keep it as low level to the business case as possible.
I probably fit in that camp, like I'm probably in the string replacing camp. Keep it simple, keep it like don't add an abstraction if I don't need it. Is probably where I stay. But
with everything programming,
your comment about the context window, you cannot think about it until you hit the limits of it. Like as soon as you get that error, like you've stuffed too much in, or you have problems, you're kind of you've got to manage it and think about it. We'll see. Let's keep going. here.
Maybe I got one last question on this one. See if you guys can all hear me.
Yeah.
How do you guys all think of this when you add in RAG? So now you're adding in context,
Mm,
from
great
your
question.
proprietary data, and that might be really long. It might be, much longer than whatever the prompt template or the user query was. And so I think that's one where putting this as code and being more object oriented makes a lot more sense to me. But yeah, would love to hear your all takes and takes on this.
Yeah, I think on that question, the Llama index or the LangChain, both the systems that are probably the leaders in the RAG connection, all have like prompt objects. So I think all of them have gone that direction. Where I do find, I don't know if you've all found it yourself, but sometimes it's like impossible to find what template they're using. like go try to find what exact string template LangChain's using when it's doing RAG for some situation you've used. And it's just like, you're filling the object-oriented abstractions on layers of abstractions as part of, that overhead that you have. But I think most of those systems have, designed objects as the way that they organize those, and it makes them slightly, more painful to troubleshoot.
Yeah. And if you don't know what low-level prompt template it's using, just got to plug into prompt layer and you'll kind of see it in our logs. But no, yeah, I completely I agree. It's annoying, but it's also the first time I used Llama Index, I was like, wow, I don't even know how it's doing this. I'm just like, it was kind of magical to me at first. So I could see a future with the magic, but I also agree when you like really want to squeeze all the juice out of your system, you're going to want to actually write your own prompts and do this prompt engineering. And and I think I think maybe let's go to the next section for.
Yeah, and there's a really good comment from the comment section, which is like, use the right solution for the right problem. It's a little hint there. So like, I there is probably no one way of doing things. You're going to get both examples. Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Maybe both examples in one org.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think the next section we're going to talk about is actually a really common use case we hear all the time around structured data extraction. Maybe Jason, you could hop in, just given my internet here right now, but maybe you can hop in and just kind of cover the second part.
Yeah. So very, very common use case across the customer base right now. And then I like prompt layer solution has some really good visualizations of this in the next couple of slides. But I see a lot of customers trying to using LLMs to extract structured data. So here's an example of how you might use OpenAI functions. And so this is just, again, if you're using OpenAI, if you're using something else like a Palm or something a different one. There's actually different options, guardrails, etc. But the idea is something like this, which is you're defining what you're trying to extract. In this case, it's a temperature here and maybe a location, and you're defining it like what you're kind of extracting it from. So like think of it, text string in, and then structure data out. Examples, we have customers who are doing like chat bots to purchase something, and I want to extract data to understand what that purchase, what that person's looking to purchase, for example. So a lot of those, many more. This is going to be everywhere. Anything to add, Jared? And like what we gave an example here is the function, a little bit of like the function structure. It's a little strange. I mean, I do think I don't think I would have thought of naming something as a function if I was gonna talk about data extraction, structured data extraction. I think you had a little hint that they used. It was originally used for their OpenAI library. The plugin system. You had an idea there, but the naming of it as functions is a little different than I think the usage I see in the ecosystem.
Yeah. I kind of love like that it was like a natural evolution here. Yeah, I mean, like again, like you said, like I'm not 100% sure this just came. I'm like 99% sure this only came out because OpenAI was adding plugins to ChatGPT, and the plugins are literally just functions, and you need a way to give structured arguments to the functions. And it's like, okay, now we have all this data. Let's just fine tune GPT 3.5 on it or something like that, which looks like what they did, but you're 100% right. It seems like it's unlocked a like whole new potential of LLMs, which is, and this is the way I see it. Like the big problem with LLMs today is that fundamentally it's a non-deterministic like tool, and fundamentally it's probabilistic. You don't know, you don't know what the output's going to be. Sometimes it's going to be random stuff. Sometimes it's going to be gibberish. Sometimes if you're asking for a number 1 to 10, you're going to get some words. And the problem with that is we're already building complex systems that rely on extreme determinism. And already, like, if you've worked on any Eng team, you're going to get errors and people are going to say, oh yeah, this is just a flaky error. Don't worry about it. And it's like, how could it be flaky? Like, aren't we building a system that makes sense? And now we're like, all right, now let's build a whole system on top of this tool that is super flaky by definition. And that's why this is super cool. It's like, okay, so now we found a way to kind of wrangle it into the box we needed. And obviously it's not perfect because it's still based on the LLM, but yeah, it's unlocked like just how do you return structured data, which is pretty crazy when you like really consider the implications here.
Yeah, I think there's, I mean, my guess that, I mean, given the functions structure they have, you know, they might have fine-tuned the model to respond in a certain way based upon the function JSON that they get, so that they it understands to respond in a more structured format. Where with other models, I think if you dig into like Guardrails, for example, it uses like XML under the hood, but the model's maybe not fine-tuned against it. There's ways of like getting that out. Yeah, so this gives another way for more general models where you're giving XML, which is a well-known thing that models have trained on, they've seen out there, they've been built and seen a lot of in the wild. And so when you give the XML into the hood and ask it to respond with XML, it's responding in a structured way. So there's ways in which you can get a model to respond in the way you want, but I'm not sure they're really fine-tuned to necessarily react like where OpenAI's you might have a little more success with pure functions given how deeply and tightly they're integrated. The Guardrail stuff is kind of called loosely integrated. It's a library or libraries that you might use around a different LLM that isn't fine-tuned.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I think there's a lot, and there's like JSON former I saw, and a lot of people were trying to make this sort of thing before OpenAI came out with functions. And yeah, I just love seeing people use functions. Like before you'd have to spend so much time prompt engineering to just get maybe you want to have something that generated SQL, and just to get the SQL and not the, hey, here's your SQL query, and now you can like pretend it's an argument to a function. But yeah, I mean, I actually have a question for you, Jason, and Aparna. I wonder if you guys have any insight on this. How do you like when you're trying to get structured data out of the LLM? Is there different ways to evaluate, to do prompt engineering? Like, is there different ways to evaluate how good the prompt is at pulling out structured data? Like, how do you even think about that?
It's a great question. I think like in a number of these cases, as you're getting structured data out, it does become like a little bit more of it might, maybe it fits slightly more into traditional data science ways of looking at things. Like, did I get it right? Did I get it wrong? There's like a did I pull the right structure out? Did I miss? And if you think of like, I think Aparna made the note the other day, like think about like how we measure named entity recognition or something. There's probably some ways in which you can look at traditional performance metrics of how well it's doing. You can just look at structured data over time. Am I like like the same ways we think of like structured distributions, and are you way out? Like, am I coming up with some crazy new values for a categorical variable that I'm pulling out, or like all the ways in which we monitor and think about structured data flows in traditional models actually are relevant, in addition to maybe performance metrics for some of these like NER or something. So I think there's a lot to bring to bear on how well it's working.
Maybe one more thing to add to that is that I think it's interesting, Jared, you mentioned maybe the beginning was like pulling the structured data to go using the tools, like especially the tools functionality they expose. But I've been seeing a lot of people pull structured data and then use it in maybe other models.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
maybe not even LLM models, but things like maybe inputs to recommendation models or inputs to, other applications. And in those cases, what I've seen is that they typically have some sort of schema that they're looking for. So maybe you can measure things like, well, how much of the schema were they able to correctly pull out? Was there anything left behind that could have gleaned or could have extracted? And then, yeah, like Jason said, if you're pulling some structured data, is there, is that structured data evolving over time? Are you seeing new patterns in the structured data that's been extracted? I think are all interesting ways to evaluate it. So maybe break it down into like, how well did it extract the structured data, and then how is that structured data changing over time? It could be kind of like the two patterns.
Yeah, I think that's super. Like, I feel like I'm approaching this somewhat. I mean, like, prompt layer, like at prompt layer, we're all hackers. We're kind of approaching these problems as like hackers, like people building projects, like assuming this is kind of like a black box API tool and just building from there. And I guess you guys are coming from the perspective as Arise. Like, I don't know if it's traditional ML or classical ML or whatever the word for it is, but like ML ops way of thinking about it. And like, you probably have a standard way to measure these sort of things. And I guess functions brings you back to that like standard. Hey, we know how to do this. Is that a correct understanding?
I think it is. I think the way we kind of view it is like, in the end, we kind of saw like being a production platform and we think about things in production is like, you want to troubleshoot things, you want to measure it. And it doesn't matter what you're delivering. You need to know whether you ideally know whether it's working or not in production, and want tools around it. And I think we don't want to force fit things into data science problems, but if they fit, like it becomes a natural thing. Like don't like, if something's a classification problem, there's a lot of really good metrics. Don't invent. You don't need to go invent some new ones. And so I think for us, it's like what fits in the right way, what measurements make the right sense. But yeah, a lot of times we just land back into like, how do we know if it's working or not? Just because we're production, like that's the or productions are deep strength and what people use this for. So like, how do we understand whether something's working or not? So we think about that a lot. And what metrics fit to understand performance in different environments. And I do think, there's a lot of cases for new metrics, but there's also a lot of cases for like, just let's, this is really a classification problem. Like, let's use something traditional.
Don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to, for sure. And this is an interesting comment as well about kind of low-level ways under the hood of like, obviously not for OpenAI, but for Llama and other open source models of like how to actually force structured output. This comment is saying with like guaranteeing starting responses with like a curly brace token. And I guess you could do that on the prompt side as well, if I'm not mistaken, by just ending the prompt with it, but I could be not fully understanding. But yeah, no, so there's definitely, these are not comprehensive of what.
Yeah, I think his point is a good one, which is like, if you have access to the model, you can actually do things that kind of force the output. And I think the point there was like, if it starts with JSON, hopefully the rest of what's going to follow is JSON. Yeah, so it's gonna be interesting to see what it's just something better served with fine tuning. I mean, it's a good question. Like, could you fine tune to better respond with structured data? I mean, it's probably, I see a lot of use cases for fine tune that I think are that I think are often a little bit in left field, but this one actually might be a good one for it. If you had a structured data extraction use case, it might actually be a good fit for fine tuning. But
yeah, I think I think fine tuning, like at least the OpenAI fine tuning, I think basically what we've heard is DaVinci 3 fine tuning was like pretty bad. You didn't really know what was going on, and nobody really got anything good out of it. It's better to use 3.5. Now OpenAI, as of I guess last week or so, released fine tuning for 3.5, or maybe the week before, something like that. And most of the people we've spoken, like people are still trying it out, and like jury's still out, but it seems to be the best for changing the format of the response. And this is very much a format problem in terms of structure. So yeah, definitely try fine tuning. That could help. Functions is a fine tune thing.
Agree. I think there was a good quote out there from, I don't know if it's the Anyscale CTO, but it was like, great for changing the expression of the model, not great for storing new information. And this is kind of an expression problem. Cool.
Yeah. Okay, so let's jump into the next section here, which is kind of like the prompt template testing process. And I think Jason and Aparna had some ideas they wanted to chat about here.
Yeah. Sorry, you might have gone backwards here, Maggie. Sorry. So the prompt, so typically, so iteration process, like I kind of feel like you want to be an environment that allows you to replay. And I think the prompt layer has an amazing, again, all of you on the call, you should check out prompt layer if you haven't. Amazing solution to like build and serve and iterate on prompts. I think that as you're troubleshooting, you do want to get to a spot like if you're in production, you do want to like, okay, well, what if I added this? Example we had was we had a RAG template that was basically call it hallucinating a lot, and really what the problem was there was just kind of missing an indicator in the template of like, just say I don't know if the context doesn't answer the question. There was like one sentence that needed to be added to that, and like and trying to put all the pieces together to be able to like replay that is hard, or can be hard. And so how do you like have an environment where you can just kind of test and make sure that like the one thing you want to go do is going to work? And then Jared, maybe you can talk a little bit about like storing, and like I think there's a lot of value to being able to like save off what you have and store and iterate your kind of playground environment.
Yeah, totally. I think I mean, you said it well. Iteration, kind of these things. I like to say that getting your prompt right the first time is almost impossible, and it is kind of knowing your prompt is right is kind of the halting problem until you're in production. There's like, you're never going to be able to test every edge case. You're never going to be able to know if it's gonna work. Because again, let's assume an LLM's a black box. Let's assume you don't know every weight by heart. And this is an iteration process. And you want to be doing this in a systematic way. You want to be doing this in a scientific method type style. And like for example, on our platform that we just released today, you can now add commit messages to different versions and tag them with prod or dev and stuff like that. And we really like believe that, yes, don't think too much about how the model weights work, but track everything you're doing. A lot of people have Excel file or spreadsheets or whatever of, hey, this is version 1. This is good at these use cases. I tested it here. And I think having tools around this obviously helps, but at the very minimum, track it on Notion or on like Notes app or something like that.
And do you, I mean, one question, and I know where you stand in this, but like, do you think most people start off with like with their kind of prompts and code first, and then maybe move to a serving system, or maybe you have some vision of like, how does it go? Like, I feel like prompt layer plays in that like second, like that the other category there, where you've now got it allows you to iterate quicker. Is that, that's kind of the vision of what the prompt engineering platform is kind of trying to paint.
Yeah, I think feedback loops are super important here. The kind of the life cycle we see most of the time is you're just kind of YOLOing it. You're just typing a prompt and you're like, oh, that works. Let's just ship that. And then the next stage is maybe you're putting in the notes app. Then the next stage is maybe you have 4 variables in your code. That's prompt version 1, prompt version 1 better, and prompt version 1 better, actually better, something. And it's just getting really weird. Or maybe you're throwing it in your Git version control. But I guess what you're mentioning, Jason, is it's really powerful to have a quick feedback loop and to be able to say, hey, promote this new prompt version to production. Hey, what was that prompt version I used 3 prompts ago? And yeah, I think doing this in a operational way is very important because it's just tinkering.
Aparna, can you comment on this one?
Yeah, so this one's a really interesting one. I think that you have there's probably the OpenAI Evals library has gotten really popular. You've heard of that one, I'm sure, Jared. But like this library has gotten really popular, and it's one that I think, as we were talking about evaluation of prompts, I think folks have been bringing up. And so I just wanted to lay out a distinction between what is OpenAI Evals and then what maybe, Jared, we're thinking about when we talk about evaluating prompts. So the OpenAI Evals library is really focused, like the persona of this is, think about it as the people building the foundational models. And so they're actually looking at metrics like out there to understand how is Llama 2 better than Vicuna, or how is some fine-tuned version of Llama against maybe GPT-4. And so the thing that's actually under test that you're using OpenAI Evals for is the model, but you hold a lot of the other things constant, like the prompt template, what are the inputs, and you're looking at compared to the same inputs, the same prompt templates, different models, what's the difference in the outputs, how good are the outputs, versus something like prompt template evals. If you go to the next slide, Maggie, on this one. Okay, perfect. Yeah, this one. So this one, prompt template evals, is really the thing that's under test is the prompt template. So you're holding maybe something like the model constant, the inputs constant, but you're testing and evaluating different prompt templates and trying to understand which prompt template is doing a better job at giving you better responses. Is that distinction clear? Jared, is that, any notes you'd add to that?
Yeah. No, I think it's very clear. I guess curious about a few things here. First, so I'm looking at this graphic now. So I guess the parameters are probably what's held constant here? What's changing between tests? How frequently are you doing the tests?
Great question. Great question.
Pick one or all.
Yes. Okay. And let me wrap up maybe one last point on the OpenAI evals. Actually, Maggie, could you go one slide back? You guys have all probably seen this OpenLLM leaderboard. It's very popular. It's on Hugging Face. A lot of these are actually what I was getting at, which is the different models. So these are all kind of the top OSS models out there right now. And there's different metrics like, average across a bunch of different metrics, truthful, how truthful is these models. Hella Swag is actually a name of a metric used to evaluate how good the model is at reasoning. And so these are all different metrics to evaluate how good the LLM is. And so again, the thing that's constant when you're doing OpenAI evals is again, inputs, think about it that way. The inputs from a user, like what was this, what was that, how do you write me a letter? There's a template, which is also held constant in the OpenAI evals, which is, hey, you're a helpful AI assistant, you're helping users answer questions. The thing that's under test is you're comparing maybe the first model here against the second model, versus when you go over to the next slide, actually, Maggie, the thing that we're interested in, Jared, and in the prompt engineering world is keep the model the same. We're going to use Llama 2, or we're going to use GPT 3.5. And we're going to keep the input questions the same. So the input questions might be, write me a email to do this. But the thing that's actually under test is the prompt template. So in the first example here, the prompt template's it's a lot smaller. It just says you're an AI assistant, respond succinctly. In the second one, the prompt template actually has respond succinctly. And when you don't know the answer, say you don't know. And so if you're evaluating for things like how truthful or how hallucinatory is the response, your prompt template too is probably going to do a lot better job of just saying when it doesn't know something. And so this is kind of the input data is consistent, models consistent, but your prompt templates the one.
It's worth noting what we see in the ecosystem is when we say like the data is consistent, the data is the same. People are saving off these like test data sets. They're saving off like, okay, here's my golden test set, which is funny. That's you have that in ML as well. But like you're saving off this golden test data set, which are like prompts and responses that either were a little off in some way or way off in some way that you fixed, and you're building up this data over time, which is then what people are using to kind of like, okay, I'm going to test my new prompt before I or made this change, let me test it. But then the same prompt's going to end up in production on wildly different data, and you're going to measure it as well. And someone asked a question here, thumbs up, thumbs down. It's a bad icon there. It's not really thumbs up, thumbs down. Like these test data sets have this golden truth of like, this is the right answer, and this is the input, and here's the prompt. So this is kind of what we see a little bit happening in the ecosystem. People are essentially building these golden test data sets to test their prompts and understand their performance when they make changes.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, actually. So I want to keep talking, but yeah, actually, let's go to the next slide, and I'll talk about it in that context. So this is just a screenshot of our evaluations in prompt layer. Honestly, evaluations might be a misnomer for what it is. It's just like a way to batch run prompts, and kind of like similar to that graphic we were showing. But just to go back to Mahad's question here about like, how do you score these things? Are they from the end user? Are they thumbs up, thumbs down? How do you measure it in production? So a lot of questions here. Honestly, this is the billion-dollar question, but there's a few ways. I'll talk about what, I guess, the in production and in development. So let's split it that way. Let's talk about in development first. In development, you're going to do something like this. Jason was saying people build like test cases and kind of like data sets of test cases. And this is, as you can see here in this table, we're basically running a prompt. Original and summary are like variables being inputted into the prompt. And then we have two columns of responses, one's from GPT 3.5 and one's from GPT 4. And kind of how you're testing it is you're just running batches, and most people are just eyeballing it today. If you want to go to the really advanced LLM teams, they're taking it a step further. They're either, as you can see, there's an export CSV. So some of our teams actually, some of our customers actually do this, but maybe you have a team of human graders that you're sending this to. You're having them rank every output, and then you're combining it, or maybe you're even building an AI rule. So this is, I think, really cool, and I think this is where we're trending, is kind of like, how do you actually let the LLM grade these responses? So in this case, maybe I had an LLM that said, is the response a number? And I could probably just do that in regex as well, but there's automated ways to do it in production. It's similar. You can do it automated way. We kind of have a thing where every log you can add a score to, which is an integer, 1 to 100. So like, yes, you can do some sanity checks, like, is the response just a number, or did it freak out on you? But giving a true evaluation is hard. There's been some research studies about LLM eval, like synthetic evals, just as good as human. I believe it, but again, this is going to go back to the original point we keep making, is these things are used like use case by use case. Pick and choose for yourself. Pick and choose what works with your team. Pick and choose if product managers are running prompt engineering on your team, you might want a more visual tool like this. Or if engineers are doing it, if engineers are running prompt engineering, you might want more MLOps style evaluation suites. So yeah, Jason, do you have anything to add to that? Because I feel like this is a very important subject. I know you guys are thinking about this as well.
Yeah, we're doing, I mean, the production evals, expect that in itself is probably not just an entire webinar and series, but like expect a lot in the next 30 days. We're gonna we'll probably do another session on this on that. But basically, our view is that there's a huge opportunity for LLM evals. What that is, what that looks like, how it works, how you can trust it, how you can do it in a way that gives everyone, both in data science and just pure production engineering, confidence in it, I think is the hard part, and which, we'll probably do, expect another session in 30 days on that, but also expect us to be releasing, stuff where we talk, releasing some of the solutions based that we've been building internally. I think that
I got my popcorn ready.
Yeah. I mean, the big thing is like, it's probably, you could probably do an hour discussion just on that, like one, that one question there.
Right.
And we're so early in the space, and but expect it to be something we're thinking a lot about. And yeah, one of the tougher questions that we all have.
Cool. And yeah, I think just to kind of like sum up the process of like prompt engineering and evaluation is that, like, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's really tinkering. Like, it's really just, you want to A/B test, you want to iterate quickly, you want to test different models, you want to test honestly, you want to test different hyperparameters, you want to test temperature. It's not going to do that much, but you probably want to test that. You're going to get some more juice by testing that. You want to cost and latency. That matters if you ask anyone doing LLMs in production, cost and latency honestly matter even more than performance for most use cases. And you want to be doing this. You want to be tinkering. You want to be figuring all this out. And yeah, it sounds simple in theory, and it just takes time and organization. Honestly, it doesn't take long theorems, and doesn't take research papers. It just tinker.
Totally. I think what's great about this is, and I think this is the core of what you do, is just try to bring engineering to prompts. How to bring engineering practice to this like very nebulous text context window field.
Exactly.
Yeah.
and there's a few things that can go wrong that you should watch out for. So yeah, let's just talk about that. The other slide, actually, I'll go back just so we don't skip it. This is kind of just like how you track all that stuff in prompt layer. So like, because like, as you can see, versioning and cost and latency, and see like usage, so what variables have been used in the past and that sort of stuff. But tracking it is just the key takeaway of that. But yeah, let's talk about what could go wrong, because that's pretty interesting. Basically, four main things here, and they all revolve around drift, which I guess I'm borrowing from the non-LLM ML world, but like the different types of drift here. User drift is pretty important and like hard to define. Your product can change. You can change things about how you, first of all, the users you're giving your product to can change. You could change how your product looks like. Maybe it's a text field they're typing their stuff in, or is it a chat box? And that's going to change how the user behaves with your LLM and what the user enters as input variable, and just user behavior drifts. And you want to keep track of that. You want to measure in production to see if, hey, my prompts aren't working anymore, even though nothing but the user changed. Data drift is another thing here, which is retrieval. Retrieval data drift. That's a standard ML. Nothing's changing there. You want to make sure data's not drifting. Model drift. OpenAI is releasing new models all the time, and they're deprecating models too. If you're using just model name as GPT-4, that means you're getting the latest version of GPT-4, and the latest one might not be optimized for your use case. It might be, I mean, this has happened, these models are getting faster, and like OpenAI has been making them faster, and that might mean that it's behaving differently. I mean, that definitely means that it's behaving differently in some use cases. So that's something to watch out for, especially if you're not using a frozen model. And prompt drift is the last one. This is like, it almost feels weird giving this a actual like term, but as you update your prompt templates to fix new things, you might be regressing on other things, especially if you don't have a good evaluation suite or a way to evaluate. You could say, hey, our prompt doesn't behave well when the user types in a name, and you fix it. And then now the prompt no longer works when the user types in a number or something like that. So all this, it's just, again, big takeaway of all these things is track, be systematic, be like operational, and understand like things can go wrong and know when they do. Yeah. Yeah.
I was going to say,
Jason's muted. Yeah.
it's funny that you know, Drift has reared its head again into the LLM space. Yeah, I think it's, you know, again, engineering, you know, bringing engineering to prompts. Cool.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I mean, I think we went through a lot of content here. Hopefully this is pretty helpful for people. I think we've been answering some of these questions in the chat as they come. I'm not sure if there's any others. Is there anything?
There was one, I guess Theodore had said, do you know of any tool that helps writing those functions without the hustle of doing all the indexing manually? I don't, it was like 20 minutes ago, so I don't totally sure what slide we were on that one. It might be of the prompt, the functional prompt stuff we were talking about earlier. Yeah, I don't because I don't know the reference. But,
great. I guess like how to help write function, like what a function calling with OpenAI, I'm guessing. To write the function definitions, they're using OpenAPI, which is kind of a schema of how a function should look. Pydantic does a good job of being able to export a normal function in the schema. So I would check that out. Yeah, so check out Pydantic. They'll be able to export that, and yeah, hopefully that helps.
And then there's another question. Any suggestions on how to manage the context window size, especially with RAG? I feel like RAG itself is probably its own session. So there's a lot of tools we've been building out internally and we'll be putting out there. But yeah, so a lot of it's about visibility into what is happening within your RAG system and understanding different approaches to chunking and how those chunks are retrieved and how it's all working and what the trade-offs are from different approaches. So I think that question unpacks into a lot of things, which is like observability of your RAG system, and then basically kind of parameterization of your RAG system. I think it's kind of those two, and then how those two trade off performance. Yeah, we do have some sessions that are RAG specific, and you know, so I would catch either one of those or one of our past ones probably to dive in deeper. Cool. All right.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jared, for doing this. This was great. We got to do another one now.
Yeah, well, all of you, if any of you are in New York, so anyone on this call who's in New York, next week we have a really awesome team, Pinecone, PromptLayer, Llama Index, like an amazing group out there who are getting together, you know, and Rise as well, that are I think it's Thursday in New York next week. So if you're out there, we're going to be doing a lot more sessions, deeper dives into a lot of topics. Join if you're available in the area.
Yeah, definitely check that out. You'll be able to meet my co-founder. He's going to be talking with actually one of our customers about how they do all this stuff. So that'll be maybe even more interesting than us platform builders in this call. But hopefully we've been able to give some information that's helpful. You can also feel free, if you have any other questions, whether they're PromptLayer specific or just building LLMs, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to help. You can find me on Twitter. It's probably the easiest at I'm Jared Z. And also you can email jared@promptlayer.com if you're ever have any problems.
Yeah, and there's a question on getting a link to the session. So we do post the sessions and I think there's a video section as well as kind of, I think Maggie probably sends a follow-up as well to people who signed up. So we'll be, the recording will be hosted, will be on YouTube available. All right.
Well, thanks for having me.
Thank you.